Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books That I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago. As it says on the screen, desultorily chosen because of how I feel in the moment. So, the last time I did this, I did the first book of Lord of the Rings, which those who know that this was supposed to be published as a single book, but was due to various war-related paper shortages, published in 3 individual books at the time, and then republished later. This edition of The Two Towers is something that I picked this book, this particular specific edition, because the first one that I did, there was this magnificent foreword which was all about the history of the publication of Lord of the Rings, and so I picked this one because I was hoping for another fantastic foreword about, I don't know, some other aspect of the book's history, and instead I got it launched straight into the book. So, if you're looking for a version of this that actually launches straight into the book, I would advise this variant, because this variant, which I believe I've seen actually in bookstore shelves, which was, as I have in the publication information below, because if you have been following the channel for a while, you may have noticed I try to always put eminently accurate publication information into the description below of whatever edition I particularly read. This particular edition then would launch straight into it and doesn't have 83,000 forewords, so if that's a thing you're into, then you should keep in mind that probably this and the last of the trilogy, which I'll probably just be sticking with this version, would have been, will just go straight into the book without any kibitzing about other things. So, The Two Towers. To talk about the actual book, for those who don't know, because there are going to be some people like me who have avoided reading this trilogy for various reasons, and who haven't seen the movie, because I'm given to understand the movie is close enough to the books that, it's not I'm going to throw my hands in the air and say this is an inspired by thing, that the trilogy is, the trilogy of Peter Jackson movies are actually, a good effort to bring the book specifically to life. Missing Glorfindel notwithstanding. But, so in this book, at the end of the last book, Frodo and Sam Gamgee had basically taken off on their own because Boromir had lost it and was basically not really able to keep his head together, to keep on with things and to say, right, the One Ring is evil, I should not be touching it, I should not be trying to collect it, and I should not be trying to use it, and he kind of just couldn't take it anymore, and lunged at Frodo, and Frodo said, okay, well, if one of them has snapped, then the others may snap, I really need to just keep going alone. So he decides to go alone, and Sam follows him and nearly drowns, because Sam is kind of a weird... I stumbled across somebody once who compared Sam Gamgee to a house elf, and in a very weird way, it kind of makes sense, because he's just like, Mr. Frodo, I'll swim across this river. Now I'm drowning because I can't actually swim. And Frodo's just like, oh my god, okay, get in the boat, let's go. And, Sam is very, very devotedly a servant to Frodo, which is an extremely weird headspace, but it's a headspace that is much more understandable when you consider how old these books are, and that Tolkien would have grown up at a time when people still had in-house servants. These days, you can hire a cleaning lady, but time was all sorts of people, middle class people, would have house staff that were, maids or what have you. And admittedly, at the turn of the last century, the shift was made to not have the house staff living in the house at all times. But, through the aughts up to probably the 30s and into the 40s, you'd still have house staff. They'd just be, living elsewhere, but they would be the staff who took care of your house. You would have your cook and your maid and a butler and all that kind of stuff. Whereas now you have, and that would be something that people in middle class and upwards would have. So Sam thinking of Frodo as his master is a less of a weird thing when you consider sort of historical precedent, and that is Tolkien's historical precedent, not pseudo-medieval fantasy, who's it invented by Tolkien precedent. So you have this story of the Two Towers in that basically, I could have missed it, but I believe that this is very much about Frodo and Sam at one end of things having to do stuff that involved facing a tower, and at the other end of things, you have the Tower of Sauron, Saruman rather, which has basically, Saruman has had a minion of his affect the king of the people of Rohan, I think it is. I'm not deeply absorbed in these books, so the lore of Arda is not, it's not a thing that I'm sort of deeply absorbed by, so if I get names wrong, well, I'm not hugely absorbed, but you have King Theoden, which my father has inordinately commented on as being the king whose name means king in Old English. That is, the word Theoden is a word for king in Old English, that is English of approximately 1500 years ago, because, there are the three stages of English as considered by linguistics experts. That is, you have Old English, which is kind of more German than English. You have Middle English, which is what Chaucer did, where if you listen to it very, very carefully, if you look at books written in it, like Chaucer's poetry, like Pearl, Cleanness, or Patience, that you, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, that you have these books that the words in them are almost recognizable. They're like English but weirdly spelled and weirdly grammatically constructed, but you can find things in there that you recognize. And then you have Modern English, which is something that hits at roughly 15 to 1600, which is stuff that you find in Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare isn't speaking modern English in that he is speaking like somebody of the late 20th, early 21st century. What you have, however, is something where all of the words are spelled more or less consistently with the way that we spell them now. The word order is more or less consistent with the way we order words now. The words used are more or less consistent with the ones that we use now, and so you can read Shakespeare without needing a dictionary just to understand what you're looking at, which is different from Middle English. So the Theoden would have come out of Old English, because Old English and some of its immediate precursors are one of the relatively rare linguistic things in this world that use the TH sound. TH is actually an unusual sound, the th and the sound. It's actually really kind of odd worldwide in terms of in terms of people who use that. I mean, you'd have to look into linguistics, obviously, to find out, where the most commonly used sounds in all languages on planet Earth are. But I'm given to understand that it's actually relatively rare. And I'm going off topic, but part of that is because Frodo and Sam struggle in extremely hostile territory and run into Gollum, who leads them through, even though Gollum is kind of clearly going to betray them at some point, and indeed does when he hands them over to a giant spider. And on the other end, the rest of the Fellowship of the Ring, sans Boromir because Boromir is dead, meet up with Gandalf, who died in the last book, but apparently magically came back to life because mystical Arda superpower god reasons, and is now noodling around again doing whatever he does, but the rest of the Fellowship goes to basically bail out the people of Rohan and to fight back, the army that is attacking. So they do that, and then they go find Saruman, who has become Sauron's stooge, and yeah, that's kind of it. And it's fine. It's the middle of a book. It's it's the second section, and in the third part we'll have a couple of major climaxes about both the trek to Mount Doom for Frodo and Sam, and some more fighting with armies of the other guys. But it is what it is. This is not... The thing about this book is that it's revolutionary in terms of its world building, very much in terms of its world building, the coherency, the size and scale of it, and the whole fantasy novel thing. This is revolutionary in that way, but as a piece of fantasy fiction in general terms, because this is the model on which fantasy fiction has been designed for decades upon decades, that this is not something that feels, wild and crazy and amazing and new, precisely because this is the source of all of the stuff we've been reading since. And so it is somewhat suffering, I fear, at least in my case, from the negative impact of, yes, I've seen this a million times. This is the standard hero story tropey thing in a million other books, except that this is the first one. And so at the time, you have something that would have captured the imaginations of the particular cult following that it had. And in its way, I think part of the reason that it attracted such a massive following when Peter Jackson put out his film trilogy was because so many people hadn't been reading genre fiction, or at least this particular branch of genre fiction, before. Genre fiction has a long history of being sneered down at by people who just think the worst of it. And so when genre fiction catches on, it's like the newest thing in the world to people who have never read any of it. And so there was a particular and peculiar explosion at the time that came out of Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, sort of hitting the general population all at once, and it took the world by storm and left a lot of nerds shrugging because, dude, we saw this decades ago. What's your problem? Anyways, that's kind of all I have to say, because you may have noticed I didn't find this deeply absorbing reading. It's fine, it's entertaining, it's perfectly good as a novel, just not catching me. So that's all I have to say in my sideways ramblings this week, so I will see you all next week.